Phil Schneider has 17 years experience working in the government black projects. He carried a level 3 security clearance. He's a former government geologist and engineer in the black projects, underground bases at areas 51, S4, and Los Alamos. He's going to expand your mind here this morning. Please welcome Mr. Phil Schneider.
Welcome to the show, everyone. We're doing Conspiracy Corner with Duke. Duke, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for doing this again, Wes. Enjoy doing it.
Thanks, man. No, I enjoy talking with you. And I know one of the things you and I were talking the other night, I said we should do a show on Phil Schneider. And do you want to give the audience a background on Phil Schneider, who he was, and just kind of an overview?
Kind of an interesting background on Phil. He actually worked for the government for a number of years. He was a geologist, had a background in machinist and whatnot, and he, according to his own story, ended up working with them building deep underground military bases that they were supposedly building at the rate of 2 or 3 a year. And he claimed that at the time that he was going around making this data public, that they already had 131 of these deep underground military bases just inside the U.S., and they were all connected by tubeways. And he also talked about the kind of machinery that they were using to build these things, and that they actually had the usual boring machine is just a big, like, tube-shaped piece of machine that's got a boring bit on the front of it, the same size as the tunnel they want to make, and it drills out through the rock or whatever, bores its way through, and then the debris is goes through a series of conveyor belts out through the back of the machinery. The newer one that they were using when he was still working on it, and this was quite a while ago, back in the 70s, apparently they had a nuclear-powered version of it that had a tip on it rather than a bit, and the tip would heat up to about 1,500 degrees, and it would basically melt or deflagrate through the rock, and then the machine pushing through it would push the slag into like cracks in the rock and sort of form a casement right of the vitrified rock right around the machine itself as it continued to crawl forward. So you didn't have to put any kind of truss work or anything to hold the tunnel up. It was basically held up by the melted rock that the machine displaced as it was crawling through it. And Phil ended up getting away from this whole situation because he was working, according to him again, for NATO, building all of these things. And he found out, he got a couple of invites to go to secret UN meetings that were being held, and they weren't at the United Nations headquarters, but at some other location. And he claimed that they had a series of chairs that were set up on a higher level, and after all of the normal people were in the room, that out came marching the people that were going to sit up at these chairs at the higher level, and that they were like 7-foot-tall gray aliens, which is where the whole story kind of takes a real hard left turn and gets really kind of strange. But he went around between 1995 and 96 and did like 30 different public meetings on this, where he was one of the speakers or the only speaker, and talked about this whole situation. It was his contention that the governments of the world have a working relationship with these aliens, and that they're working toward a long-term goal of establishing one world order, and that the aliens want to be the ones pulling the strings. And reputedly or reportedly, this is why he was eventually assassinated, after he claimed that they tried to kill him 13 times before it looks like they finally got him, because the whole thing on his death is just so weird and contradictory. It just doesn't make any sense. So, he was just one of these guys that supposedly did all of this sort of black ops work for the government, and then decided that what they were doing was completely out of line. He was working for the bad guys, and decided that he would try and make amends for it by actually getting some of this information out.
I'm Phil Schneider. I spent 17 years in black budget programs, government geologist, as engineer, structural engineer with aerospace applications. self-taught metallurgist, became kind of famous in my own right. I basically would have a set of notes here, but they're unavailable in all this melee. Up here I have different artifacts explaining some of them are alien metals that have been produced both on this planet and the confines of outer space that are now used in all stealth aircraft. All stealth aircraft, for instance, all black jets, what you're seeing of black helicopters and the like, the skins and the coatings and the residues that are used predominantly in the aircraft themselves, in the airframes and the rotor blades and the fans, and in some cases in submarines, special titanium hulls, in the Phoenix class submarines now. All this has come from alien technology. 1947 is what the public has been told. Something crashed in the backyard in New Mexico, a place called Roswell, New Mexico. Unfortunately, that's what the public's been told. The military's known about the alien question for the better part of 70 years, and they first saw their glimpse of what was going on as early as 1909 in the American Southwest. Now, Army cavalry evidently were chasing some bandits, and they entered this cave. They were holed up in a cave, and what they found in there was flying discs and little gray guys and all kinds of weird things, and they didn't know how to explain that, and they wrote them down as best they could, and it's been in secret archives ever since. And it's up down by the Truth or Consequences area of New Mexico. Well, the alien thing is more than just what I'd call a non-visible threat. We on the surface, first of all information dealing with alien or alien reproduced technology or alien reproduced vehicles or any other kinds of things, well hidden from the American public. Our black budget, for instance, garners $1.023 trillion every 2 years. It's over $500 billion a year. Right now, there are 131 active deep underground military bases in the United States. There's 1,477 of them worldwide. Each one has an average cost of $17 to $19 billion. Each one is built in the site. It used to it'd take a year to 2 years to build each one, and now they're capable of building a couple of them a year with sophisticated methods. My colleague Al Bielek has actually been on some of the high-speed railways, the Magneto-Leviton trains that connect all the deep underground military bases within the United States. He's been on a Mach 2 train and floats off of a single rail at 3/4 of an inch off the rail, and is what you'd call high tech. We have nothing like this on the surface. The public basically has been totally lied to. We're considered stupid or even moronic in some cases. It's got to stop. If we're going to gain our country back, we must, and I repeat, must instill in our public officials, anybody that goes and does public service, they must tell us the truth. If they cannot do this, then they must be impeached, or they must be removed from office. If this cannot occur, if the truth cannot totally come out, there are reasons for secrecy, for instance, but if the truth cannot totally come out, what's the use in us having anything called freedom? Okay, now I have pictures here that I'm going to show you during the break in artifacts, and I ask you to kind of look at them but not handle them. I have actual crashed retriever metal from Roswell, New Mexico. It's given to me when I was 14 years old. For instance, I've got other things. I've got pieces of this piece of titanium, a special titanium alloy made for everything from the original SR-71 Blackberry. That's old hat now. F-117As, they're old hat now. They're making a whole new class of hypersonic above Mach 5 aircraft that employ extremely modern charged particle beam weapons. They don't even use lasers anymore. Computer enhanced imaging radar, although it's used in helicopters for public surveillance, computer enhanced imaging radar, and in satellite technology. The brand new kid on the block is a kind of infrared technology where a satellite 150,000 miles out in a geosynchronous orbit, or not quite geosynchronous orbit, but these spy satellites can literally look in and see a dime on the floor, say on your kitchen floor. They have a resolution factor of 99.999961. This particular piece of metal, I'm going to drop it on the floor here, it'll kind of ring like a bell. You can't break it. Withstand temperatures in excess of 7,500 degrees Fahrenheit. It has niobium in it. It also has mironite in it, element 123. Yeah, please do. It's in a non-crystalline form. This is just kind of a dripping out of the main crucible. Here's a crystalline example. It's in the scalenohedral crystalline form. We got this from the large grays technology. This is grown in the confines of outer space, which has not quite a super vacuum, but by the way, this is capable of withstanding temperatures in excess of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's great for certain parts of aircraft. This kind of material I work with on a daily basis. Up here we have a transparency of Groom Lake. Groom Lake is where the infamous Area 51, S4, S2, a CIA base, it was originally a bombing range, a nuclear test site. It was later become the most secret base in the United States. It employs over 18,000 workers who work in shifts of 12 hours at a whack. Most of them work in the cover of darkness, like us. We built 9 underground military bases there, each with an average capacity capable was basically a city underground, roughly 4.25 cubic miles hollowed out underground. They have boring machines, for instance. They don't bore, they literally vitrify and melt the rock, deflagrate the rock. It's a very sophisticated laser melting and deflagrating system. It reduces the rock to a powder and then melts the remaining rock as a coating on the inside of the base, so you don't have to use gunite cements and other kinds of things like that. That's all old hat now. Technology is just basically the new technology we get is the old hat of the military. I'm going to be real brief about it. I carried a level 1 security clearance, the Rhyolite 38 Factor. There are very few of us. There's nobody except myself, to my knowledge, talking like this. Nobody. I'm breaking the law. I'm breaking world as well as federal law, coming out and even talking about this to a group of people. I love my country more than I love my life. 2 weeks ago, I was shot in the shoulder. I don't want to gore you women out, but I was shot in the shoulder up here. I recently have become friends of a retired FBI agent who took me under the wing. He says, I've never seen a person braver than you. And I said, well, there's more coming. Our patriot movement in these United States is going to pick up the ball, and we are going to kick the parasites out.
He has a very impeccable military record. And when you hear him speak, and I'll play clips of him throughout our show here, but when you hear him speak, he's very no nonsense on what he's telling you. And the part that bothers me about the Phil Snyder thing is I've heard that from several people. Mm-hmm. In fact, I had one military insider, he called them the Dracos. And I said, what is the Dracos? And he said the Dracos is a reptilian alien, and they keep pointing towards this Dulce. I know you and I talked about it on the last show, this Dulce, New Mexico. And I've been told several times to go check out Dulce, New Mexico. There's more than just alien stuff going on. When the locals tell you they saw a half man, half something running around out there, maybe stop and listen to what they have to say. And this is people in the military telling me this. Maybe stop and listen to what they have to say, because they're probably not lying to you. Phil had an interesting, and I'll play the clip here in a moment, but the whole story of him getting attacked, do you want to go into that, how he actually lost his fingers and was opened up like a fish?
Yeah, actually, prequel to that, he was in more than one firefight with these things. Previous to that whole situation, he had apparently been lowered down into another same sort of situation where they were drilling a hole straight down that they were then going to use to make connecting cross tunnels on, and either bore or blast the material in between that they wanted to get out of there out. And they had bored into a cave. And so, of course, they knew that the bore bed had got into some opening, so they took him in the basket. And apparently these bores were about 6 feet across, so it's big enough to put a human in a basket and lower him down. And, you know, that would have had to have been fairly terrifying, because they weren't making anything that was closer than a mile to the surface. So imagine being in this rickety metal basket, being lowered down there. You're the first guy going down. And when he got there, he said it looked like a natural cave, and he got out, walked around a little bit. The air quality was horrible. And he had his flashlight going, and he saw something that he thought moved. He went around this little corner in the cave, and he was face to face with an alien, what he called an alien, again, like a 7-foot gray. And he claims at that point that he pulled his pistol out and ventilated the thing and got the hell out of there. Now, later on, he was working, getting back to Dulce again, the Archuleta Mesa. They had already built a military base in there, and they were planning on building a second one. And when they were digging the boreholes down into the second one, same thing happened. They came out into an open space. And backstory on the open space is that apparently the government knew all about it. It had been a base that had been constructed a long time previously, and humans and aliens were using it. And at some point, the aliens decided that they just wanted to use the whole base and basically kicked the humans out and took it over. The government was well aware of the fact that it was there before they let the crew go ahead and try and dig tunnels down into there and build another base there. So what their actual motivation was is beyond me. But again, they hit the same problem. There's an open space. What the hell's going on? Phil, go down there and check it out. So they put him in a suit and, for protection from environment and whatnot, load him down there in a basket. And this time, when he came out, there were supposedly 2 of these gray aliens there. Having already had a previous experience with one, he grabbed a clip, slapped it into his pistol, and took some shots at the first one, which he claimed it killed it. They're mortal, they do die, he killed one. The second one had this little box-shaped device on its chest, and it waved its hand over this, and what seemed like some sort of a massive electrical discharge along the lines of a lightning bolt hit him, burned off a bunch of fingers on both of his hands, and opened him up from below the sternum all the way up to the neck, as he said in his own words, like a fish. Now, at this point, he was down for the count, but they had already started lowering down other people behind him, and apparently expecting something. And they had a military contingent that he didn't understand why they were even there. They had showed up a couple days previously. And these guys came down the bore and had a huge firefight with these things, during the course of which he claimed 66 people were killed, 44 of which were American service people, special forces, black and green beret, and 22 foreigners also were killed in this firefight. And this was in 1979, and it set off what he claimed was basically a sort of a secret war between us and the aliens that's been ongoing ever since. And so at this point, he decided that people really needed to know about this. The situation was just really out of control. And he still wasn't willing to come forward and talk about it. It was actually his friend Al Bielek who kept bugging him over and over and over again to come forward and start getting some of this information out because he wasn't in the Navy anymore or anything. And he also had told Al that during the course of this going on that they had visited him a number of times and basically said, why don't you come back to work with us? You shouldn't be talking about this. You caused us a lot of trouble, and knock it off. At which point he said no, and they apparently started trying to assassinate him. Now, at the point where he finally did die, he claimed that they had tried to kill him 13 times already. So it kind of makes you wonder what, if his story is true, what exactly they were thinking when the government just let him go ahead and drill a hole in there. Maybe they were thinking they'd take the aliens by surprise, and that's why they had the military there to go down and wipe out the remainder of them, and they could take over this old base again. But, there's just no way to know.
In working with the Black Projects, I was very loyal. I was picked because I was very strong mentally. There's a bunch of us that were picked because we don't crack under pressure. We don't freak under pressure, so to speak. Everyday events don't bother us. Now, I was involved in something very controversial, almost totally unbelievable to most of you. Some of you are religious people. I think all religions have a time and a place, and they definitely have a place in America. Now, another thing I want to reach to you is that during the unbelievable part, I was involved in building another base inside of Dulce, New Mexico, which is Los Alamos Laboratory. It's a biological laboratory. On the southwest part of the Archuleta Mesa, we built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground. Then to the southwest of that, we were in the process of the early stages of building. We drilled 4 large tunnel-like holes. Some of them ran 2.5 miles under the surface. Number of the original wells or drilling machines that were used were at the rate of up 2 miles a day. It was fairly rapid. The equipment kept coming up broken. So we wanted to go down, we wanted to send somebody down there, a human observer, or human observers in this case, to find out what was going on. Well, to our total surprise, first of all, the government knew all about it. They didn't tell anybody. When I saw Green Beret and Black Beret people encamped inside of our geologist camp, I knew something was up. The gig was up. First of all, I knew all about the alien agenda. I'll explain that in a few minutes. The large alien grays had been encamped there for, as best as believed possible, about 400 or 500 years. Had been one of their internal bases. And we'd drilled holes right on top of it. All the stinking air, all the black sooty air came right out as soon as the first hole was sunk, and all this soot came up, and well, that's when all the hell broke loose, really. All started. Anyway, after we drilled all 4 holes, it took about 2 days to drill all 4 of them. And when you build a underground base, you drill 4 basic holes, and then you build called stopes or cross-member holes across, and then you use blasting equipment, special blasting equipment by the analyzation of the rock formation, and you literally blast out or tunnel out or deflagrate or melt rock out to build the large rooms that are required for this underground base. Well, in this process, I was lowered down the basket of one of these holes, and about from me to this elderly woman here in the front was sitting a 7-foot-tall alien gray. The stench was worse than the worst garbage can you can imagine. The person or the entity was absolutely horrible. I didn't waste any time. I reached for my pistol. At that time, as an engineer, I didn't have time to carry all the Folderol of one of these big submachine guns that all the sea spray and the yellow fruit and all the outer perimeter and inner perimeter security people carried. I carried a little Walther PPK pistol with a 9-shot clip. This was in late August of 1979. Now, you got a regular suit of clothes, you got a regular clothes on, plus you're in almost like a spacesuit environment, and you're reaching for a gun, it's not the easiest thing to do, and then to pop a clip in it and start shooting. And I killed 2 of them. Yes, they're mortal, and they do die. However, in the process, one of them did this. All I remember is that he just kind of waved his hand in front of his chest, and the next thing I know, this blue beam hit me and just literally opened me up like a fish, and burnt my fingers right off of me. And it was some form of electrical force, because the kind of like being hit by a lightning bolt burned all my toenails off of me. Completely crispy crittered my left foot, burnt the shoe right off of me. All I remember was the smoking remains, and I'm still conscious, but in and out of, I didn't remember much. And there was a Green Beret that was right behind me that risked his life. In fact, he died. But he risked his life. He shoved me back in the basket and hit the button and took me up. And I wouldn't be alive talking to you today if it wasn't for him. I'm forever indebted. He lost his life. 66 Secret Service agents, Green Berets, Black Berets, crack troops lost their lives because the government, our United States government, lied, did not tell us anything about the alien threat. There's a war underneath there, and I'm talking dead serious. It's been going on since that time. Since late August of 1979, our military, the Russian military, basically the militaries of the world, have been in constant conflict with the outer space alien. The small gray, the large gray, the reptilians, the whole thing. There are 11.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You makes you wonder why. I know for a lot of people listening to this, they might think this is crazy talk. But as you and I talked in the past and kind of off the air, I get told this kind of stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. Just really weird, strange stories from people kind of like Phil Schneider. They're legitimate people telling you this stuff, and it's kind of like, well, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
You know, and it makes you wonder if it's true, it's more terrifying than anything else we got going on, if this is true.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that, Phil, if you look into his background, he had no history of mental illness or anything along those lines. So you can't use the excuse that, well, he was just, a crazy guy and that's how he came up with all this, because, he was working for the government and, had a very, very high security clearance. And if he was a crazy person, they never would have let him work for him in the first place. So, again, this sort of tends to back up what Phil said. I mean, I'm not coming out and saying that I believe all this, that it's absolutely true. No. Me and Wes are presenting this as much information as we can on these subjects for you guys to think about. Go vet that information. Go do some of your own research. Decide what you think about it. We're just going to tell you all the information that we can dig up on these subjects, and then let you guys make the final decision on what you think.
Yeah, I had a guy on one time. He goes, and this is one of those stories I never put on the air. It was a law enforcement guy, and he was in New Mexico, and he said he ran into, they were on a dirt bike, a mountain biking race or something to that effect. And he said what he saw is this thing cross the road. Well, I'm thinking we're going to talk about Bigfoot. And as he's describing it to me, he said it looked like, he goes, I think it was an alien. And I go, it was what? And he goes, well, it was like a half man, half lizard running across the road. It was upright, like how we walk, but had the face of a snake or face of a lizard. And he said it ran up into the rocks and it was gone. And the other interesting point he said it had a tail. Mm-hmm. And so for the longest time, I was trying to figure out what this guy was talking about, because he's not describing a dog man. He's not really describing a Sasquatch. And I'm not really big into the alien thing, but this guy was as sincere as they come. And I just could not figure out what this guy was talking about. And he didn't even know. And so, as you go into this whole story of Dulce and this deep underground military base, you hear a lot of weird stories. I think there was a security guy that got killed there. Hey, have you heard about that?
I'm not sure that I've heard that one.
Yeah, it was. I'm trying to remember where I heard it from. The story goes it was a military guy, and it's 8 levels of this underground base, and humans were not allowed to go to like level 7 and 8. And in level 6, you could hear people screaming for help. And he ended up going down there by mistake. He got stuck on the elevator. He went down there by mistake. And he said there's like people in cages. There's children in cages. And he ended up running into one of, he called it the Dracos too. He ran into one of the Dracos. And he got reprimanded for that. He basically got fired. He got, I don't remember the whole story. He got fired. Something happened with his job. But anyway, he started talking to one of his other friends that were on the base, and they say that the Dracos actually eat people. They get off on, it has to do with the adrenal glands. When you become scared, they almost kind of get off on it. And when I heard Phil Snyder talking that exact same thing, it kind of brought chills up my spine because I had heard that before. Sometimes I think in life, fact is stranger than fiction. And if this is really going on, then what is going on with this world? You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
My personal opinion, I don't think aliens are aliens. I think they're demons, but that's my own personal opinion. I could be 100% wrong, but I firmly believe that it's demons, demonic activity going on. And it's terrifying, man. It's terrifying to hear this stuff.
It absolutely is.
And to see a guy with missing fingers, and actually, I think that, and I'll try and show it in the video, but he actually opens his shirt and it looks like he was flayed open by a lightning bolt.
Yeah, he did that right in one of the public speeches. They've got that on video. Somebody asked him about, can you prove that you had this injury during this firefight with the alien? He unbuttoned his shirt right there and showed him the scar from it. So, again, sort of tends to back up everything. Apparently, the base. Are you talking about the Archuleta Mesa, the base that you're talking about, where the guy got fired?
I think it was Dulce.
Yeah.
I want to say it was Dulce.
That would be it. Yeah. Supposedly that there's the tall gray aliens and there's the reptoids are the 2 types that are at this base. From what I've been able to understand, I might be wrong. There could be more. But from what I've heard about the Greys, yes, they do like to predate on humans, and they actually make a sort of a drug out of their adrenal gland that they call adrenochrome that they get high on, and which goes right along the lines with the same thing with the reptilians, who like to have the humans that they're going to eat be extremely terrified before they eat them, because apparently they like the taste of the meat better that way. And I can state from personal experience that I've had meat from a slaughterhouse where they were not very careful about not terrorizing the animals before they delivered the death blow to them. And you could tell the difference. You could taste the difference in the meat. So that's a no BS right there. I can personally bet that there is a difference in the way the meat tastes. And, whether these things get high off it or whatever, there's other people that are on the same page that we are on that think that they are probably demons. And they think that these things actually can derive sustenance from negative emotion in some fashion, that, fear, sadness, heartache, whatever, negative emotions, anger, rage, all these things, that they actually can somehow derive some sort of sustenance from it. So, I mean, there's another weird thing that sort of ties in with all of this.
Yeah, it does. It really makes you wonder what's going on up there in this whole thing and what the agenda is. It's kind of like the insider I had on with Chris. Coincidentally, it was the Air Force that was cracking down on Chris. And Chris was told, don't talk about any sort of DNA manipulation. Don't talk about aliens. Stick to Bigfoot and minimize what you say. And, it's just shocking to me. I think one day these things are going to pop up and everyone's reality is going to be shaken to the core.
Yeah, and again, that might point up to another thing that Chris was talking about, how they're on purpose turning out these movies from Hollywood with like again weird monsters, zombies, vampires, aliens, all this sort of stuff to desensitize people to it, so that when this finally comes out, it's not going to be as big of a shock. It won't be this huge culture shock. There won't be people freaking out, hopefully. I don't see how they think that's going to happen, but, this is the way it was presented to Chris anyway.
Yeah, the other thing, too, about Phil I thought was interesting is Phil always, months before his death, he said that if he showed up with a suicide, or it showed up looking like a suicide, he let his family know that he has no intentions of committing suicide, and that he was actually killed. And when he died, they claimed it was a suicide. Mm-hmm. And he didn't live that far from me. He only lived, Phil Snyder, he only lived, he lived in Lake Oswego, which is a 20-30 minute drive from where I'm at. And his wife had mentioned, because in some of these videos that I've been showing throughout this interview, some of these videos, he actually will hold up different objects, different elements, different pieces of metal. And he'll say this was on this jet, or they've created this metal, they grow it in space, and it withholds X amount of degrees of fire, or under a flame, it won't burn. And she said all that stuff disappeared. Mm-hmm. So here's a guy that quote unquote commits suicide, and then all of his evidence coincidentally disappears too as well. Yep. They're really cracking down on and people need to look into this Phil Snyder guy, because, like I said, his military record is impeccable. His service to the country is impeccable. There's no reason for this man to lie. No. None. And I think he actually took a lie detector test, if my memory serves me right, and he passed with flying colors.
Yeah, I can believe that. If you want to go a little bit more in depth, this might be a good point to talk about the situation surrounding his death. He was actually divorced. He was not with his wife at the time, so there wasn't anybody else there in the apartment with him. Supposedly, the only person that could have come into the apartment was from somebody from elderly disability services that was supposed to have a meeting with him. But apparently, by the time the landlord called and the police showed up to take a look and see if he was okay, he had already been dead for 3 or 4 days. And don't forget, he had already said that they had 13 attempts on his life prior to that, and if he came up dead, it wasn't a suicide. So now the first police report says death by natural causes. This came out on 1/17/96. At 1850 hours, they found him. He was kneeling on the floor next to the bed with his face in the wheelchair. Now, that's kind of a weird position to be in. He appeared to have been dead for 3 to 4 days. They tried to call the medical examiner, Mr. Coleman, who, for whatever reason, refused to respond. Therefore, they took his body and sent it to a nearby funeral home. Now, keep in mind, his wife never saw his body, ever. His family didn't see it either. The funeral director then called the police and said, hey, this guy has a piece of medical tubing wrapped around his neck, and it appears that that's how he died, from strangulation. So, again, the medical examiner, Mr. Coleman, elected not to respond to this, and also Police Sergeant Joyce also failed to respond to this. And I went back later and did a little bit of a research inquiry on this, and Deputy McClelland, who had actually supposedly done the investigation, said he did not see anything around Phil's neck at the time. Well, his body was bloated, so if he had a piece of tubing around his neck, they may not have been able to see it, just to give the deputy a little leeway. However, he did mention that he had seen a piece of an end of a catheter tube near where Phil's neck was, and the deputy also claimed he had not taken any photographs of the scene. Well, when do you not take photographs of the scene of somebody's death when you're investigating it? That makes no sense at all. Okay, so they had him in the funeral home. They did an autopsy on him. Toxicology came back negative for blood, urine, or stomach contents for drugs. So there was not a death from an overdose. Autopsy report said that the death was by asphyxiation. And there's a section of the autopsy report even where it says quote, neck wounds described below. But if you go and look below on the document, there is no description. There's no further entries or description on that document that explains what it was all about. And then later on in the report, it says there was no neck wounds and no sign of a struggle. Okay? So Phil's blood and other samples that they had taken then were placed on a 3-month hold. After 3 months elapsed, there were requests to get that material, and they said, well, now it's on a 1-year hold. So hoping that people would forget or something. Well, after a year, they came back and requested it again when the year was up. And the answer they got this time was that the samples had been lost. Now, finally, an obituary on Phil was released to the paper. It was not posted by his family, and it claimed he died of natural causes, even though the official cause of death is, as it currently stands, death by suicide.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder if this guy's full of crap and he's lying about everything. How does he pass the lie detector test? All the stuff around this story, whether people believe this story or not, and I tend to believe that this story actually happened. Because I don't see any reason why he would make this up. And there's way too much for him to lose. You know, he can lose his military retirement. He can lose his disability. He had way too much to lose over this to come out with this fantastic story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and his retirement at that point was $500,000 a year. I mean, this guy's getting $500,000 a year. You know, that would be a lot of money to lose just because you want to go out and tell some crazy story. That makes no sense.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And then the other interesting part is around his death. Again, whether people believe the story or not. And again, I wasn't there, but I tend to believe this man, what he's saying. How he died is odd, just odd.
Very strange.
And he, you know, leading up to his death, he's saying, "Hey, listen, if I wind up and they say it's suicide, please know I didn't commit suicide. They've been trying to kill me." I think in one of the videos, and I'll play it for the audience, but in one of the videos, he said he was actually shot in the shoulder, and he pulled his shirt down, and there's actually a bullet wound in his shoulder. And so I think they were trying to shut this guy up. I think he was saying way too much, and it makes you wonder. It makes it more terrifying to think, what is the agenda behind this?
Yeah, and what's their reason for being in such a big rush to make sure that he shuts the hell up and quits spreading this information around? If it's false, why bother?
Right.
Good disinformation, who cares? You know, it's a great story. They don't give a shit about people telling lies. They only care when you're telling some real secret that they don't want getting out. And the other thing that's interesting here is that he was fairly close to Al Bielek and had talked to Al a lot, you know, behind the scenes, and mentioned that he had a whole lot of really interesting paperwork at his apartment. Well, after he died and they spirited his body away, and next of kin and whatnot came over to collect his effects, there was no paperwork there. That was all gone.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. You know, if this guy's story is so crazy, and then why go after him? You know, it's such a crazy story. If you didn't have all this other stuff around this story, and he just told this wild, crazy story of this gunfight he had with aliens, I think most of the general public would look at it and go, "This guy's insane."
Yeah, absolutely.
But when you start looking at the details around the story, take the whole alien story out for a moment. Just listen to the details around what's going on with this guy. It makes his story more believable, to me anyway.
Yeah, it does to me too. Again, you know, the military will not, or the government, they won't silence people that are just telling fairy stories. They don't care. The only time that they're interested in getting rid of somebody is when they're telling actual real secrets that they don't want vetted. And you know, apparently, if you believe what Phil was saying, that it appears to have been what happened in this situation.
Okay. Back in 1954, I'll give you a quick overview. There was the created 1954 treaty where Eisenhower signed a pact with the known alien species of the time. There were 3 at the time. And said that we're going to deal in high technology, but you can take a few head of cattle and a few human beings and you can experiment on them. It's unthinkable. It's stuff straight out of the Nazi death camps, and I'm kidding you not, it's plain BS, and it's got to stop. Now, the created 1954 treaty had been violated after After the great firefight, the alien-human war, I am the only living survivor talking about it worldwide at all. Only one. The other two are in nursing homes in Canada, and the Canadian government refuses to allow any U.S. people, including myself, to talk to them because they are afraid of kidnapping. Probably the reason I got shot to pieces and 11 attempts on my life is I am a direct threat to the entire system. The New World Order, the alien agenda is one and the same. It's world takeover and the decimation of the population of this planet. Now, I'm going to tell you something a little bit different about the alien species. The bad news ones, there are 9 races of alien populations. To look at a human being as a bag of food. They're not cannibals. They don't eat the flesh and the bones and all that kind of stuff. They use the glandular secretions of animals and human beings as a mixture of the vitamins for their food. They get high off of our adrenal gland substances called adrenochrome. It's something like cocaine to them. Now, what can we do about it? Right now, if we do nothing, we can do nothing about it, and it will continue to go on. Basically, we'll be led in the dark, and you'll keep seeing more and more people disappear. Right now, there's 100,000 children totally unaccountable through FBI archives, cannot be traced anywhere. They haven't been murdered. Nobody's ever seen them. I think they're hauled underneath in some of these bases, and they are summarily done away with, and they are literally eaten. Now, that is a scary thing indeed. And I'm not asking you to believe me in toto. I am asking you to seriously do enough homework that you can go out in through the public record, through the congressional records, find out who's voting for what, and go from there. Do your own program. Do your own agenda, and do your own speaking out. And if enough of us do this, there is some saving grace. However, we don't have a whole heap of time left.
The question of has it been kept secret or how could it be kept secret? It hasn't been kept secret. It's been there all along. But it has been the subject of disinformation in order to deflect attention and to create confusion so that the truth doesn't come out. Disinformation is simply another method of stonewalling. And that's been used consistently for the last 50 years or so.
This is it, dudes. This is what we came to see.
No Navy planes that we could see.
There are no jets, no planes of any kind, no helicopters. We did see something. In fact, we did see something right around 5:45, and around 5:50. That's when we saw the first saucer come out of Area 51. Right. It stayed around for about 10 minutes, and then it went back down. Right. Any evidence whatsoever.
Well, actually now, we'll call Georgie. Let him know.
They're called DUMBs. Like, you can learn a lot from this dummy, but DUMB stands for Deep Underground Military Base, and or a Deep Underground DUM-2, for instance, is a submarine base, and I have built a few of those too, which are off our continental shelves and then certain islands and out in the Atlantic and the Pacific in strategic locations. All this, I can hardly, in an hour's time, I can hardly squeeze all this in. So I'll be kind of rambling here if you just bear with me.
He's been talking to Ron about it a lot. They were doing a little digest. And then his dad died, and he found all this stuff in the basement. Well, Ron was murdered that same year, and that infuriated Philip. He says, how dare they come in and kill my friend? I saw the original envelopes with the original paperwork that had the drawings on it. I saw the original photographs with the stamps on the back from the Navy. I mean, it was all real stuff.
Author Ron Rummel was about to publish a book revealing what he believed to be the real purpose of the Star Wars project when his body was found here in Maclay Park in Portland, Oregon. His death was ruled suicide, but few agree with that verdict.
As far as the police and the FBI are concerned, it's case closed. Unfortunately, there's the shocking thing that his murderer, I believe his murderer, is still out there at large.
Why is it you're speaking out?
There have been enough lives taken under the premise of suicide when they were actually very stable individuals. They had families and they had lives to look forward to, and they had every reason to live. And if there is some form of conspiracy out there, then the more people that are talking might end up saving lives in the long run.
Over a period of time, I became well acquainted with him. I found him to be a person of integrity and honesty. And about 1 year ago, he became totally fed up with the New World Order and the establishment. He thought he was working for the betterment of mankind and the work that he was doing as a geologist for our government as well as for NATO. And he found out that it could be and was actually anything but that. And I urged him last winter and spring to go public and lecture. Finally got him out. He's given over 30 lectures to date, all very successful, very interesting. In fact, so successful there have been 13 attempts on his life since the beginning of the year, and he survived them all.
I don't want to gore you women out, but I was shot in the shoulder up here.
All I can say is God must be protecting him because he has a message.
Just bear with me. The main topic of my discussion here is to link up basically what's going on with these deep underground military bases, what they're being used for, what is the present situation now being employed both by our federal government, which is slowly being phased out by the United Nations government, as well as the New World, end quote, the New World Order, which is an even higher entity, and who these higher entities are taking their orders from.
What's going on and nothing, and there was kind of a lull in the conversation. He says, John, what do you know about cloning? And I said, nothing. I mean, this was so far out to me. And he said, just let me tell you, it's all real and it's all happening. And this is from Cecil McMains, a guy who's so down to earth, who worked on the SR-71, who did a lot of stuff, you know, and he would never, ever come out with something so unusual. I mean, I, did my stint for the CIA. I believed in, God, Amplify, and Chevrolet, and, flying saucers to me were, I mean, just, you couldn't even mention it. I wasn't interested then.
We have both seen the film that was taken out of the Dulce facility. This is a facility that's run by the United States government.
Yeah, there's no question that Dulce exists. I was the one that kind of led the research on that. I was at a meeting in Crestone, Colorado, and Tom Adams handed me a letter from a lady who lives in Las Vegas, and she was the one that tipped us off that this thing exists. She knew the location of some photos and videotape that had been taken inside Dulce by a guard who escaped during what they call the Dulce Wars of 1979.
The unbelievable part, I was involved in building another base inside of Dulce, New Mexico, which is Los Alamos Laboratory. It's a biological laboratory. When I saw Green Beret and Black Beret people encamped inside of our geologist camp, I knew something was up. The gig was up. And about from me to this elderly woman here in the front was sitting a 7-foot-tall alien gray.
Yeah, and what's interesting, I played that clip for you on the last show with the news report.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stuff people were saying in that area was the ground would open up, things would come flying out of the ground, stuff would fly into the mountain, ships they'd never seen before. Yeah. And then the other side of it is they would see weird creatures running around. Stuff that is not natural, and I'm talking stuff beyond Bigfoot, that is just not natural. And as you really look into the Dulce, what's going on out there, it kind of goes back to what Chris was saying with the whole, what they called zoos, how they were manipulating DNA just to see what they could create, just to see what they could develop on their own. And, Chris told me that in some of these zoos, they were seeing some, weird creatures, stuff, like mermaids. And I kind of laughed when Chris said mermaids, but Chris was saying, well, it's not what you think. It's not like the Disney mermaid. It's a half man, half fish that they don't live very long. And, if you give someone unlimited budget, you give them unlimited technology and say, have at it, I could see them creating this crap.
And the other thing is, they're not only building underground bases, they're building undersea underground military bases. And if you've got some kind of aquatic humanoid working for you, how much easier is that going to make the whole job? A lot. Now, the reason that I think they were so up in arms against Phil is because he mentioned that the reason that he came out and talked about this is that there was basically a two horrible part plan. One is the New World Order, the globalist, the elitist, whatever you want to call them, trying to get all of the governments on Earth to work together and create a one world government. And but the part that Phil was really up in arms about is that it wasn't our idea. It was the aliens that were pushing for this, and they wanted to have ultimate control of everything that went on here through their puppet humans that were, pretending to be the leaders of these countries and pretending to make the decisions, when in fact they were not. And just for the Bigfoot people out there, I should mention that the first time that Phil ever spoke in front of an audience about this was a closed meeting. It wasn't open to the public, and it was over in Oregon in front of a group called the Western Bigfoot Society. So there's your Bigfoot connection, but very, very slim.
Really? That's interesting. I didn't know that.
And, and the other thing, that like you bring up here, how far is the Skinwalker Ranch from the Archuleta Mesa? You hear a lot of the same sort of things coming from there.
Yeah, and the other thing, too, is it goes back to what Chris was saying. With when they unleash some of these DNA experiments, the best places they do it are in poor areas and around the Native American reservations, because no one's going to believe some poor hillbilly living up in the mountains. He ran into a half man, half something. And then the Native Americans, most people, I hate to say this, but the general public, just think they're a bunch of crazy people with their old folklores and their old ideas. And, but I'm telling you have to stop and really listen to what some of these people are saying. And I guess for me, I become desensitized to it because I've heard it in the past from other witnesses I've spoken to, where they've told me this off-the-wall, crazy alien thing they ran into, or half man, half something they ran into. And then I talked to these government insiders, and they kind of give you the breakdown. They'll give you little bits and pieces of information. And then you listen to like what Phil says, and it kind of puts it all together. And like I just said, man, it's terrifying that the New World Order, you know, if you said that 20 years ago, people thought you were nuts.
Right.
Today, it seems more plausible. Less people laugh at that than they did 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as far as the disposition of the base there, we might as well give a little info on that, because they, like I said, already completed the one. They're working on the other one. And the timing here is interesting because when did all these weird sightings start and the whole Skinwalker Ranch start? Now, according to Phil, this first base was completed and all this stuff started up in the 70s, probably early 70s. So by the mid-70s, there would have been people around that area seeing weird things. And isn't that right about when that stuff started happening?
I think it was. mid-70s.
You know, and again, this once again backs up, you know, what Phil had to say. And according to him, the Dulce base, the original one that they had that's supposedly still there, has 7 levels to it. There might be 8. The information I got said 7. And the layout of it as follows. First floor is security and communications. Second is human staff housing. The third is executive offices and laboratories. Now, below the third floor, humans aren't supposed to go. So the guy that was telling you this other story, that jives completely with the rest of this information. Fourth was mind control experiments, and apparently some human technicians and alien technicians were both working together on this. Some of the humans actually had access to level 4. Beyond that, none of them did. 5th level was the housing for the alien greys. 6th level was genetic experiments, and 7th level was cryogenic cold storage. So did this guy say he went down to the 6th level?
I can't remember if he said the 6th or 7th level, and he could hear. No, it was they could go down. I believe he said to the 6th level, and the 7th and 8th level. He said from the 6th level you could hear people screaming. I think he went down to the 7th level, 7th or 8th level by mistake.
Good God!
And there was people in cages. There was kids in cages, and that's disturbing too because Phil brings that up. He says there's missing kids and there's missing people, and this guy was saying.
According to Phil, the numbers are 18,000 aliens and 20,000 plus humans that are there, either in a capacity to work with them or as slaves that are being used for medical experiments. So
you really hope this stuff isn't true. You know what I mean? My gut tells me it's probably true, but my heart tells me I hope it's not true. I hope it's not going on.
Me too.
I really do.
If this is true, it's one of the most horrible things that possibly could end up being true. And, you know, I think at this point we might want to go back a little bit before Phil and talk about some of the stuff that happened with his family, because now I've done some digging on his dad, and his dad's name was Oscar. And Oscar apparently was born in 1905 in Germany. By the time he was 15 years old, he was a master machinist. When World War II came around, he ended up joining the Navy, and he became a captain in a submarine in the Navy. And in right around 1941, something happened. He was captured by the French, and well before Project Paperclip happened, the French shipped him over here to the U.S. And upon arrival in the U.S., he was debriefed. They gave him a commission in the U.S. Navy as a captain. They created a whole fake background for him, saying that he'd been born in Northern California and that he actually had a degree in medicine. And they put him to work on the Philadelphia experiment. Now, why would they have this U-boat commander working on the Philadelphia experiment? Well, according to other people that have done some digging on this, his dad, just like Phil, was a friggin' genius. And he actually knew a lot about mathematics and computation specifically relating to time. And apparently the Nazis had a big program over there, which may have been related to the Bell, where they were trying to figure out a method to move objects and presumably people through time. And part of the Philadelphia experiment had to do with that. Although they weren't trying to do time travel, they were trying to figure out a way to basically cloak or render invisible an entire huge ship or something along those lines. And part of the experiment had to do with the time distortion that was causing it. And, you know, if you want more information on the Philadelphia experiment, plenty out there. You can go look that up. But at the time shortly before his father died, his father told Phil that, no, I'm not Jewish. We're not from America. I'm actually from Germany. I was a U-boat commander, and that's where the family came from. And so this sort of shook up Phil's world in a big way to start with. And then I think the rest of the stuff that went on afterwards was sort of the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back, as it were.
Phil, he was pretty good friends with John Lear.
Mm-hmm.
And some pretty high up people. And I watched an interview one time with John Lear, Learjets.
Yep.
And John Lear said he believed Phil. He said he's known him for a long time. He believed his story. He believed that this was going on. And it just, like I said, it's just disturbing, man. I really hope it's not true.
Yeah, it really
hope it's
is.
not.
And there's other things that, now, according to his buddy Al Bielek, and if you guys want to look him up, he's involved with some other weird stuff, which has to do with time manipulation and opening stargates and all this kind of strange stuff. But he was convinced that Phil was telling the truth, and that each one of them had part of the story, and that they should both be coming forward and sharing this information with people so they knew what was actually going on. And so he was one of the main reasons that Phil started doing these public speeches and letting people know what was going on, because basically his friend Al had talked him into it. And this is another guy that's, if you read the background on this guy and the stuff that he claims and stuff, it just sounds so amazingly far out there in left field, it's just hard to even swallow it, even if you've got a lot of collaborating information, which, by the way, there is some. But the Montauk Project is another one to look at. Both of them knew about that. Phil was not directly involved in it, but had knowledge of it and basically didn't talk about it. This is like, again, when you open up the story on Phil, you open up a whole can of worms, and it can go in all sorts of different directions depending on what you want to research on it.
Yeah, and a guy like Phil, what do you do with him when he's talking too much?
Yeah.
You don't, you're going to take him, you're going to bring him in and have a tribunal or take him to court, or, you kill him is what you do. You get rid of him, because all that other stuff draws way too much attention. And yeah, it's too bad they killed this guy. It really is. I'm convinced they killed him.
I pretty much am too. Just if you look at the circumstances of his death, it's so suspicious, and they contradict themselves over and over and over again. And there wasn't a proper investigation done. The family never got to see the body. My God, if you want a perfect situation for an assisted suicide that was not by choice, there it is.
Yeah. Sounds like cops are coming for you.
They're coming to get me. Well, the other thing that I thought might be interesting that we should probably bring up while we're on this whole subject is one of the reasons that me and Wes both think that the aliens, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, are not what they pretend to be, is because they've been caught lying over and over and over again. If you remember back in the early 50s or late 40s even, when these saucers first started showing up, and there were people that were actually having supposedly encounters with these aliens and whatnot, one of the first groups that they met were called the Tall Nordics. They looked like big blonde humans that were, like genetically perfect or something. Sounds like Hitler's breeding plan. Anyway, they claimed that they were coming from Venus. Now, back in the late 40s and the 1950s, we had no way to vet that information. Nowadays, according to NASA, if you believe them, we know that there's a cloud cover over Venus. It's a global warming situation gone mad. The surface temperature is like 800 degrees. Nothing could live on the planet. Okay. So as soon as we found that out, the Greys, now that we were supposedly in communication with, told us that they're from Zeta Reticuli. They're from an entirely different star system, which is further away, unvettable at that point. Now, again, we got more information on this, and it's starting to look like us that that's not true either. So what's the latest story? Well, the latest story is they're claiming they came from the Andromeda Galaxy. And that's too far away for us to be able to take a close-up look to know for sure if they came from there or not, ever. The other thing that ties into this is the Nazis during World War II. It's well known that Hitler was a member of some secret societies, Tula being one of them. But they also had another group working with them called the Vril. And the Vril were this really weird secret society that were probably the only ones on Earth that had all women leaders. And they they claimed that they were getting telepathic communications from aliens on another star system, and these telepathic communications were being written by the person that was getting them, Maria Orsic from Zagreb, Yugoslavia, if I remember right. And she didn't know what it was that they were giving her, because she was just doing automatic writing and writing it down, and it wasn't in a language or an alphabet that she or anybody else around there understood. So apparently through some means, probably through the intelligence service of the Waffen-SS, they managed to contact another woman who actually knew what these characters were and came over and translated it. She has a code name. Nobody knows what her real name is. They called her Zigrun. Anyway, Zigrun said that these actually were written in the same script, same language as the Babylonians had been using, and that these aliens were telling them that they had actually come and helped establish the Babylonian civilization thousands of years ago. And it also had certain similarities to phonetically to German. So they managed to translate this information, and what it was basically blueprints or an explanation on how they could make a sort of a generator that was unlike any of the internal combustion engines or anything that we had at the time, that would practically run forever, and as side effects could basically warp reality, create its own little bubble of reality around it. So you could go at like 3,000 miles an hour and make a right-angle turn, because you're not being affected by the Earth's gravity. You had your own little gravity reality bubble around you. So this would explain why the flying saucers could do all these crazy maneuvers that no human could possibly survive if they were inside of it. And apparently, according again to the rumors circulating around World War II, the Vril had one up and running before World War II had gotten very far, and they didn't want to share this information with the Nazis. So the Nazis had their own unit of the Waffen-SS, I think it was Unit 4, that was actually working on this, and they were trying to do the same thing. By the end of the war, they actually had a couple of these things that were functional. They even claimed that there were sightings by the German troops and the Russian troops of one of these things floating over the battlefield during the Battle of Kursk, which for military people know this is the hugest tank battle that ever occurred in human history. There's like 3 million people involved in it on both sides. And just, unbelievable horror went on for days before the Nazis finally bogged down and had to give up the effort and withdraw. But there's, still blueprints and drawings and stuff of these things floating around, claiming that the Nazis did in fact have this technology by the end of the war. They just didn't have enough of it and enough of the material for the engines to make enough to be worth anything to help with the war effort. And that sort of jives with the what do they call it, the Swallow, their operational jet fighter that they had at the end of World War II. Those things were awesome, and they could go like 150 miles an hour faster than the fastest Allied plane could go. But they didn't have very many of them. Remember, they were having to build everything underground at that point. We were bombing the living crap out of everything on the surface, so it made it more difficult for them. And of course, raw materials were getting more and more scarce. And they finally gave Hans-Ulrich Rudel control of all of the jet fighters at the end of the war, and just left it up to his discretion. And he actually was planning on crash landing them into Allied military airstrips and doing as much damage as he possibly could that way. And the rest of the men underneath him talked to him about it and said, look, the war's over. We lost. There's no way we can win. This is just like futility. It's just pointless for us to throw our lives away on this. And apparently at some point they talked sense into him. He agreed with them. For those that are interested in Mr. Rudel, he then went to Argentina and became the head of their Air Force. Okay? So there's some weird connections there, and there's reason to believe that maybe World War II, as it's been presented to us, was a lot different than what people are trying to say.
Yeah, and there's places in Argentina that they claim Hitler went to.
Yeah, so they know for a fact.
And which isn't too far off, because in some of those areas...
Yeah, they know for a fact that there were a bunch of Nazi subs, top-of-the-line subs now, that were in Argentina and actually surrendered there at the end of the war, and 2 of them had come up from part south. Well, what's south of Argentina? Antarctica. And that's another thing. Nazis claimed actually no less person than Admiral Dönitz, claimed that they had built an impregnable stronghold for their Fuhrer at the far ends of the earth. And there's a bunch of other information that points in the direction of Antarctica being where they built some sort of secret hidden base. And even just the routes that the U-boats would follow toward the end of the war, they knew they were going to Antarctica and back for some reason. They didn't know if they had a fuel depot there or what was going on, but when they were patrolling and prowling around the southern hemisphere, that was a place that they regularly went to. So again, there's that strange thing there. And there's some people that even think that, Hitler didn't commit suicide in the bunker. There's actually pretty good evidence for that. And that he escaped. Hanna Reich might have been the one that flew him out of Germany in a Feisler Storch, because she did land right next to the bunker shortly before he supposedly committed suicide. It was crazy, but she was a crazy pilot. And so, there's some that saying he went to Argentina. Maybe he did. And there's some that saying he went to Antarctica. Well, maybe he went to Argentina first, then Antarctica. But, that's neither here nor there. But the point here being that a lot of this stuff just doesn't jive. If you want to vet what we've supposedly been told by the aliens, it does not jive with facts. And so I believe they're liars. I don't believe that they are aliens. I think they're demons in disguise. They've got an agenda, and they're just working for their boss to try and take complete control of the world.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And like I said, and if you look up historically, they had the Grey Neighbors when I had Gary Wayne on, he talked about the Grey Neighbors or the fairies, and they flew around in flying machines and they would kidnap people and take them up. I mean, this has been going on since the beginning of time. And it's just given a different name. They're given a different identity, but the story is basically the same. So I tend to agree with you. Again, I could be wrong on it, but it's fascinating to listen to, especially this Phil Snyder. If you've never, I'm sure most of the audience has seen this before, but first time I ever saw this, I was blown away by this guy. I was blown away. I mean, he's not the greatest storyteller in the world. He's you can tell he's logical and very to the facts, but it's fascinating. His story is fascinating. What happened to him is fascinating. His death, everything around this guy is just very interesting to me.
It is to me too. And like I said, this whole can of worms with Phil, once you open it up, there's a lot of directions you can go with it. Montauk Project, the Philadelphia experiment, the Germans doing the Bell experiment in World War II, Project Paperclip, the Schwabenland, their secret base down in Antarctica. Why is it that, let's just touch on this Antarctica thing for a quick second. Why is it that the largest expedition ever mounted to Antarctica was a military expedition by our Navy, headed by no less a person than Admiral Byrd? And they were supposed to be down there and doing scientific research. Well, why do you need a whole flotilla of Navy ships, including an aircraft carrier and a submarine, to go do research down there? And supposedly they lost several ships and a bunch of their planes and a bunch of people. Well, these things don't just crash. These people know what they're doing. They know how to fly a plane around. If they're going to have a problem with it or something, they'll try and ditch, and somebody will pick them up or whatever. The claim is, and I've seen the same claim from a Russian producer of all things. There's a Russian general that came up and talked about this, and they did a video of it, and it jives exactly with the other information. That really they got there and they were attacked by a bunch of flying saucers and Nazi jets who pummeled the crap out of them. And they decided that they had taken so much damage, and not knowing if they were going to get attacked again, it was just unfeasible to stay there. And their mission that was supposed to last like 8 months lasted like 8 weeks or something, and they had to turn around and come back again. Well, why send a naval flotilla to Antarctica to start with? And this is shortly after the war ended, 48 or 47, if I remember right.
Wasn't Operation Paperclip, wasn't that where they were taking Nazi scientists and saying you're American now? And wasn't that what Paperclip was?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. We were trying to scoop up all of the Nazi scientists that were really involved in all this spectacular high tech that the Germans were coming out with at the end of the war, and get them over here before the Russians nabbed them. And then, of course, they would have the technology and could conceivably use it against us. And so we were trying to grab up as many of them as we could. And there were some really big names. The head of NASA was, I believe, a former colonel. in the Waffen-SS at one point, and Werner von Braun was a major or a colonel in the Waffen-SS. And guys that go to, if you're just a member of the SS, maybe it's just because you like the uniform and you wanted to play along with Hitler or whatever, but really, most of these people were just absolutely fanatical. You really couldn't be in the SS unless you were a fanatic. And the ones that were the officers were the ultimate fanatics. So wait a minute, all of a sudden we're going to absorb all these scientists that are fanatic Nazis, and they're just all of a sudden going to decide that our way is the best, and they're going to be great Americans, and they're going to do things our way. Who had that lapse in judgment? Yeah. And the other scary thing about Project Paperclip that a lot of people don't know about is that General Reinhard Gehlen, who was in charge of the whole intelligence wing for the Nazis that was in Eastern Europe, so it'd be basically what became the Soviet Union afterwards, and in Russia, was absorbed into the CIA wholesale. They took that whole intelligence unit with all the people in it and General Gehlen still in command and just absorbed them into the CIA and let them provide information for us. Now, that's an astounding lapse in common sense and judgment.
Now, a look at a moment when national security interests trumped ethical concerns. Jeffrey Brown has our book conversation.
Nazi scientists, some of them tied to war crimes, including horrific concentration camp experiments, brought to the U.S. in a secret program to advance American security interests during the Cold War. It sounds like the plot of a film drama, but it actually happened, and on a large scale. The story is told in the new book, Operation Paperclip. Author and journalist Annie Jacobsen joins us now. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
So these were top scientists in the German war effort, sought out by the U.S. military as the war was coming to an end.
That's right. These were Hitler's top weapons makers, and Operation Paperclip became a classified military program to bring them to the United States. It also had a public face, so there was, on the one hand, the truth about the program kept secret, and on the other hand, the idea that we'll tell the public that these are the good Germans.
The good Germans, but they were dedicated Nazis, the ones you write about. We should say there are many, 1,600 in all, right?
Yes.
You document about 21 of them, dedicated Nazis, some, as I said, involved in horrific stuff. What they did was known, right, to the people to the Americans who were seeking them out.
Certainly to the American military intelligence officers who were interviewing them. The idea that they were involved in war crimes was really necessary to be kept secret, and that's exactly what happened. And so in the book, I think I unveil a lot of the truth about this program that has remained clouded for decades.
Yeah, I guess to put it in perspective, it'd be like us bringing ISIS people in or Al-Qaeda people in. It's like, well, you're a scientist, we'll make you an American now, and just shady, man.
Yeah, we don't care how many people you've cut off or how many you've executed. We need that information. Yeah. So you can be an American now. That's just fine.
Yeah. It's sickening.
It really is. And the same thing with, look at the experiments that the Japanese did in World War II on prisoners. They're using prisoners for doing, medical experiments and stuff on. We got all of that information from them in return for not prosecuting their war criminals. You ever wonder why there wasn't any Japanese being prosecuted in Nuremberg? That's why.